First of all, just to say thanks very much, Jonas. It was a bit of an exaggeration, a bit of a huge exaggeration from Jonas there, but much more worrying than that exaggeration is that the two first male speakers, not the female speaker, who's much too clever for this, the two first male speakers in the Scottish European Parliament appear to be black shirts. My God, so I don't know, make it out what you will. Anyway, okay. How do I do? Maybe I'm money here or something. Oh, I'm just next to it. Okay, well, that's me. Okay, what is the Scottish European Parliament? This is a question that has been asked so many times over the past year or year and a half that I've been working on it. Often said with a sneer, it has to be said, what is the Scottish European Parliament? I mean, there seems to be an almost oxymoronic content there, Scottish European. So, what is the Scottish European Parliament? But the thing is, if you're still asking that question after the events on Tuesday night, to which Jonas referred, the events on Tuesday night in Westminster House of Commons, then I think you're just really not paying attention to what's going on. You've really got to admire Jonas Staal's sense of timing. If anything, this is a tribute to his uncanny ability to judge the right moment. Because there you were, in one fell, undemocratic swoop, we seem to be losing two parliaments, the European, maybe quite distant and remote, and the Scottish Parliament, which is, with which, of course, we're much more familiar and is much more nearby. We're losing, we appear to be losing at this stage, something of any, at least these two parliaments, without any debate at all about the way we use them or their usefulness or anything like that. No debate. You saw that the other day. It's actually almost comical, really. It calls for, there's an obvious call for a paraphrasis of Lady Bracknell in Oscar Wilde's what's the place? God, I've forgotten. The Importance of Being Earnest. I'm sure you all know that one. It would be, to lose one parliament may be regarded as a misfortune. To lose two in one night at Westminster looks like carelessness. Yeah, so Oscar Wilde, of course, just calls for that, doesn't it? But of course, Oscar Wilde, as we all know, was the droll genius of social comedy. So if he was the droll genius of social comedy, then Jonas Staal, I would say, is the supreme ironist of political art. Because yes, that's what this is. It's political art. Creating this space was a pragmatic effort to fix a public thing, a res publica. It is an optimistic project. It is, yes, as Jonas said, it is a utopian project. And the utopian aspect of that project is precisely why Jonas Staal has chosen a decommissioned oil rig as the model site for the Scottish European Parliament. Oh, missed that slide first of all. 3, 2, 1, yes. Same images as Jonas, but you see them shifting, and 3 parliaments, 2 parliaments, 1 parliament, and that's it, and all the Scottish, well, all the SNP, all the Scottish members have left. Make of that what you will. But here is the utopian parliament here. Where you can cite the utopian parliament? On, as Jonas said, the Kittiwake rig in the North Sea. There are several key features, and I think that's what I want to talk about, that's what I'm going to do in my talk. Several key features about this choice of site, of place, of this particular rig that make it powerful, innovative, and thought-provoking for the site of a Scottish European Parliament. I would say these features can be roughly gathered together under the headings of utopian, monumental, remoteness, and precariousness. I'm going to go into what I mean by that very briefly. Don't worry, I'm not going to go on and on, hopefully. Okay, so let's take the utopian first of all. It's a word that Jonas used quite a lot there. What do we mean when we say that this wild, windswept, desolate site is utopian? Maybe at a first glance, it's something very different from what most people think of when they think of utopian. So what do we mean? Well, utopia is a political tool. The idea in creating a utopia is of creating a model which is isolated and remote from reality in itself. And thus, that allows a critical distance that allows you to look from a privileged position, from a neutral position, from afar, and to analyse what is the actual political situation. And of course, it's a long tradition. It's not a new tradition, a long tradition. We go right back to Plato with his Atlantis, this lost island. We go back to Thomas More's Utopia. He coined the word utopia, of course, meaning a great place that doesn't exist. And of course, Bacon's, following up with Plato, Francis Bacon's New Atlantis. All of these utopias are in remote and isolated places, usually that you have to find by a long sea journey. So it's quite, it's in the tradition, should we say. It's entirely similar to all the previous political tools that we used as utopias. Okay, so that's what we mean by a utopian parliament. So what about monumental? Again, Jonas mentioned monumental. Well, just to give an idea of the size that we're talking about, we're going to talk about monumental. Here is the comparison. Here you see the size of these structures. Absolutely massive. Okay? So, and we're going to talk about monumentality. There it is, in pure size itself. Now, of course, the monumental or monumentality is always a great problem for parliaments, because on the one hand, of course, a parliament as being a place where the collective will, the collective decisions of a people are made manifest. You want that to resonate throughout the territory or the land. You want it to be seen clearly. You want it to be obvious what it is and what it does and why it does. So monumentality in the architectural sense clearly plays a role in that. There is the parliament. That's where the people make the decisions. Sure, on the one hand. On the other hand, of course, you don't want a parliament to be monolithic, to be daunting, to be overbearing, to be oppressive. And that's one problem with monumentality, of course. We think of the Palace of the Soviets. We think of, yes, the Palace of Westminster, oppressive in its sheer size, right? In its Gothic inaccessibility. We think about, of course, Strasbourg Parliament, massive building, okay, all of them daunting, overbearing, monolithic, oppressive, perhaps. And we look at the oil rig. Yes, it has that size, it has the size of a monument, it has that monumentality, sheer size. But as Jonas said, what we have with the monumentality here is a monumentality that is pragmatic, that is practical, that is utilitarian. You can even look at the separate parts of the oil platform, and so you have the place where the helicopters arrive, so you have transport, you have the derrick and the rig just for doing the job. It's there for the functional aspect, drilling for oil deep down in the sea. And then you have this modular construction, so you have residencies, where the oil workers sleep and eat and so forth. You have offices, you have labs, you have stores, you have equipment, you have a workshop. So it's all pragmatic, it's all practical, it's all utilitarian. So in that sense, it's a very different sort of monument. It has none of the oppressive aestheticism that we might find in parliaments like, say, the Palace of the Soviets or whatever. Okay, so the utopian aspect is important. The monumentality feature is really key too. What about the remoteness that I mentioned? Well, let's take a look at a map. Where are we exactly? Right, where are we exactly? The North Sea. Where is the North Sea oil? It's round about here. It's all round about here. As Jonas said, it's between Norway and Scotland and other European countries. So it's relatively remote. Where usually is the European Parliament sited? Well, in Brussels, which is here, it's there, and Strasbourg is somewhere around there. I'm not entirely sure. Well, in the big countries, okay, okay, but we're moving from the heart of Europe away out to this remote aspect up here. You saw the waves, right, on that photograph I showed previously of Kitty, the same photograph that we showed. 60 foot high, 100 foot high. You know, sometimes the supply boats can't call for 2 weeks because the weather is so bad. They were originally, these rigs were originally built in the Gulf of Mexico, this type of rig. But of course the Americans, when they came here, and the Americans are key, yes they are, the Americans are key, I'll come back to that. When they came here to build these, they couldn't believe the weather conditions that they found in the North Sea. Really atrocious conditions. So it's remote, but what is important, I think, what is key, what is that key feature about this remoteness for this project, for this utopian project, is that of course it brings to our attention the question of the relationship between land and sea. So who owns that bit out there? It's only the right question. What's the relationship between the seabed and the land? In actual fact, Norway got a lot more than it should have got because the Norwegian trench is about there, much nearer Norway than Britain. So Britain is a much bigger bit of the continental shelf. So strictly speaking, in legal terms, if they had gone to court, Britain would have got a lot more of that oil than Norway would have got. But Norway actually has the Ekofisk field, which is round about here. I think it's 200 miles east of Newcastle. Why is that? Because they just wanted to solve it quickly. They didn't want to go to court. Why is that? We'll come back to that. But throughout this period of the discovery of North Sea oil, other countries did take their time. We all know about Norway, how they took their time and made a lot of money. Germany took Denmark to court in order to demarcate which part of North Sea oil was German, which part was Danish. Holland also went to court. Holland, the Netherlands, also went to international court of justice to establish borders because there's all the gas here, down in this area here. So all the questions of the relationship between borders, between lands, between sea, between territory, between ownership, between right to dig out from below the surface of the sea or the land, all these questions are raised by this remoteness. And given that we live in this Europe of many nations and not in fact one huge big collective without borders, these are really interesting questions that are raised by North Sea oil. So to have the Parliament there, or to think about it having it, means you have to think about these questions of land, border, territory, seabed and so forth. Very important. What is the relationship between these things and populations and peoples and countries and nations? Okay, so utopian, monumental, remote. Final point, precariousness. I'm going to talk about precariousness. Many of you will know the work of Mark Fisher in his book Capitalist Realism, talking about late capitalism. So I'm kind of stealing that concept, precariousness, from him. He says it's symptomatic of many different aspects of late capitalist life. And I would agree with that, and that's another question. I want to take this on and look at 3 different aspects of precariousness that I think are important, 3 different features that are important for this project too. The first one is in terms of the contrast of this rig that we saw, this platform that we saw out there in the wild seas. Look at these. I mean, I don't know what height these rigs are, it must be pretty tall. But like I say, they go up to 60 feet, maybe up to 100 feet too, depending where you are. I think 60 feet where the kitty weight is, but further north and east up to 100 feet waves. So pretty rough stuff. Okay, but of course we can contrast this with where exactly is the European Parliament now? Well, of course, look at the water there. Yeah, it's nice, isn't it? There's Strasbourg. And, pretty, it's wonderful, it's beautiful, it's lovely, it's stable, it's secure. Is it just a wee bit smug? Is it just a wee bit smug? Maybe. Right, okay. Is that maybe why a lot of people voted to leave? Because of the sort of smugness of these bourgeois European capitals, Brussels and Strasbourg? Perhaps. I don't know. I didn't vote that way, but I think that there might be something in that. So we're talking here about position and conditions here, which are really important, I think, for this project. The position of this Scottish Parliament on an oil rig, and the conditions you find there in the Atlantic with these 100-foot waves. Because of course, with these waves coming in, with these weather conditions, you are reminded every minute that here we are on this planet with a struggle for survival. Not exactly what you're reminded of there, which is fine, there's nothing wrong with that, but there you go. So there's an existential sense to the precariousness and what it means to be on this planet, to be hurtling around through space on the Earth. That's what we're doing. So some kind of existential reminder there, which I think is really powerful in terms of the decisions we should be making about for our societies on Earth. Okay, so that's the first point about precariousness. The second point about precariousness is about the oil business in itself. It was okay, we're going out to a decommissioned oil rig in this utopian parliament. Okay, and so it brings us to look at the oil business and at the capitalist world in general, because of course we all see in the press all the time, but oh no, oil prices are up, that's so bad for Scotland. Oh no, oil prices are down, that's so bad for Scotland. Well, which is it? Well, probably both are correct. Anyway, that's the capitalist boom and bust world we live in. What is interesting about the North Sea oil business is that it brings us right to the heart of the crude heart, if that's a possible non-paradoxical sense of saying something, crude heart of the geopolitics of the capitalist world. What do I mean? Well, the North Sea, or the North Sea oil business at its most basic, is simply an American oil pumping station to flood the market and to beat OPEC nations' control of the price of oil. That's why it was instigated. You can read about that in the various books over there. This is never said in the national press, of course, but there you go. So, what am I saying here? Is North Sea oil simply an instrument of American world domination? This project allows us to examine that history and to be realistic about those geopolitics. Who needs energy and why do they need it? It brings us to the heart of those questions. Okay, let's look at the third key aspect of precariousness, third and final, and it's the ecological one. Because there we are out in the Atlantic, in the sea, the waves battering in, and we're all aware at the moment of the prominence which we've seen in the press, on the news and so forth, about, for example, plastics pollution. There's lots of pollutions in the sea and the oceans, but plastics pollution. And of course, the plastics are made from petrochemicals, from the oil that is drilled by those rigs. Okay, so it brings us, it foregrounds that question of ecology, not just in the sense of pollution from those platforms and rigs, in terms of how we're going to dispose of those rigs, the decommissioning of those rigs as well. It's a really vital question, and again, there's quite a bit about that over on the research wall, so I'm not going to go into it. So, and it brings us to the question, what should we do about oil then? Should we bring that oil out of the seabed, or should we leave it there? Are the oil economies of the current day world sustainable, or are they not? So it brings us to these questions as well, vital questions. It puts this Parliament here on an oil rig in the North Sea is at the heart of a type of decision making that is vital, I would say, for contemporary democracy, for some of the reasons I've just mentioned. And of course, that brings us back, ironically, to Lady Bracknell's questions. So is it just a misfortune that we here in this country appear to be losing 2 out of 3 of our parliaments? Or is it carelessness? Is it even, let's go further than these questions and say, is it even a good thing to be losing these parliaments? A lot of people think it is. But is it a good thing, theoretically, anyway, to be bringing the discussion and the debate back down among the people, not to be leaving it for representational democracy? Is a parliament the best way to run a national state? Are national states the best way to be organising the continent of Europe and the continents all around the world, indeed? We won't know the answer to these questions without some vigorous debate. And of course, Jonas Staal is to be praised for giving us the opportunity in this space to have such vigorous debate. So I think we should all be thanking him and using this space. Thank you very much.